I'm 38 years old, senior supply chain manager from Seattle, Washington. 7 years married to a woman named Sarah, or at least, that's what she told me her name was. She was a freelance interior designer. She left half-finished mugs of tea on every windowsill in the house, like she was marking territory. She argued with our dog, Bruno, like he owed her an apology. She laughed at her own jokes before she finished telling them. I loved her the way you love someone you've stopped questioning. Completely, automatically, without thinking to look underneath. And on a Tuesday morning in March, I opened a security app on my phone at my office desk for no reason other than to check that the feed was finally working again after 11 days offline. I was expecting to see Sarah in the kitchen. Maybe Bruno stealing something off the counter. Maybe nothing at all. What I saw instead made me pick up my phone and dial 911 with my hands completely steady, my voice completely calm, and something cold and precise moving through my chest that I didn't fully understand yet. By 4:52 that afternoon, the woman I'd built a life with for 7 years was in handcuffs at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, boarding pass to Cancun in her hand, my dead grandfather's ring in her carry-on, and a federal warrant with 4 different names on it. None of them Sarah. I want to tell you something before this story goes any further. Not as a warning, not as a lesson, just as a fact. The most dangerous person in your life is never a stranger. It's someone who learned exactly how you think, exactly what you trust, and exactly how much time they had before you figured it out. She had calculated that she had until 8 p.m. that night. She was wrong by about 9 hours. This is everything that happened. Underscore. Let me take you back to the beginning. Not the dramatic beginning. Not the cameras. Not the airport. Not the handcuffs. The real beginning. The kind of beginning that feels completely ordinary while it's happening, which is exactly why it works. I met Sarah Whitfield at a mutual friend's birthday dinner in the fall of 2017. She was sitting at the far end of a long table in a restaurant in Capitol Hill, laughing at something the person next to her had said, and there was something about the way she laughed, fully, without checking to see if anyone was watching, that made me think she was someone worth knowing. We talked for 4 hours that night. She was sharp, the kind of sharp that surprised you mid-sentence, where you'd start thinking you knew where a thought was going, and she'd take it somewhere you hadn't considered. She was curious about everything. She asked me questions about my job that no one had ever asked before, not because she wanted to impress me, but because she genuinely seemed to want to understand how supply chains worked, how logistics decisions rippled outward, how one wrong calculation at a distribution center could cascade into empty shelves 3 states away. I drove home that night thinking about her. We were together within 6 weeks. Moved in together after 8 months. Married on a Saturday in September 2018 in a small ceremony outside Olympia, 43 people, my mother crying, Bruno wearing a bow tie he kept trying to eat. 7 years. That's what I'm asking you to hold in your head as this story unfolds. Not 7 months. Not a brief, reckless mistake. 7 years of mornings and grocery runs and inside jokes and arguments about whose turn it was to call the landlord and holidays with families and Sunday afternoons, and the 1,000 small mundane moments that add up to a life you believe in. She was patient. That's the thing I keep coming back to. Whatever she was doing, whatever the plan was, she was extraordinarily patient. And patience, when it's deployed in the service of deception, is one of the most dangerous qualities a person can have. I didn't know any of this then. I was just a man who thought he'd married the right person. So when the security cameras in our house went offline 11 days before that Tuesday morning in March, it wasn't a crisis. It was an inconvenience. The wiring in our rented house in the Eastlake neighborhood had been flickering for weeks. Old house, older electrical system, a landlord named Frank who communicated primarily through one-word text responses and moved through maintenance requests like he was wading through something thick. The cameras had gone dark on a Thursday evening. I'd filed a maintenance request that night. Nothing happened for 4 days. I followed up. Another 3 days. Finally, on a Monday afternoon, Frank texted me a single word, Tuesday. The technician showed up while I was at work. Sarah let him in, texted me at 2:17 p.m. Tech just left, cameras are back, finally. I texted back a thumbs up and went back to a vendor call I'd been on for 40 minutes. That was Monday. Tuesday morning, I kissed Sarah on the cheek on my way out the door at 7:45. She stopped me at the doorway, coffee mug in both hands. Working until 8 tonight? Yeah, probably, I said. Big inventory audit, might run long. She nodded, smiled. I'll save you dinner. Door closed. I drove to work. Completely normal. At 9:53 a.m., I was between meetings, 2 minutes of dead time while a conference room cleared out, and I remembered the cameras. Just like that. The way you remember something small and unimportant. I pulled out my phone and opened the security app. 30 seconds, I told myself. Just confirm the feed is clean and move on. The feed loaded. Sarah was in the living room. And what I saw in the next 4 minutes and 22 seconds rearranged everything I thought I knew about my own life. Underscore 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 underscore. She wasn't in pajamas. She wasn't making coffee or reading or doing any of the things she normally did in the hour after I left for work. She was standing at our open front door, and she was letting someone in. A man I had never seen before in my life. He was medium height, maybe 40, wearing a dark jacket, moving with a kind of deliberate quietness that I registered before I could put words to it. He was carrying a duffel bag. The bag was empty. I could tell by the way it hung from his hand, collapsed flat. Sarah closed the front door behind him. She looked left down the hallway, then right. Then she pointed him toward our bedroom. No words, no introduction, no hesitation. The way you direct someone in a space they've never been when you've already explained everything in advance. I sat completely still at my desk in an open-plan office with 16 colleagues within arm's reach, and I watched my phone screen, and I felt something in my chest go very quiet. The kind of quiet that isn't peace, but is the opposite of panic. A cold, focused clarity that I'd never experienced before and haven't fully experienced since. I picked up my phone and called 911. The operator answered on the second ring. I kept my voice low. I turned slightly away from the nearest colleague, a guy named Patrick who was on his own call and mercifully distracted, and I spoke carefully and quietly, each word placed down like something fragile. I'm watching my home security camera right now. There's a man inside my house. My wife let him in. Is your wife in danger, sir? I watched the screen. Sarah had followed him into the bedroom. I could see the bedroom doorway from the living room camera angle. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't on her phone calling for help. She was moving with purpose, opening our closet, pulling boxes down from the top shelf, handing them to him one at a time with the calm efficiency of someone helping a friend reorganize a storage unit. No, I said. She's helping him. The operator paused. Brief. Loaded. Can you confirm your address, sir? I gave it. I stayed on the line. The man worked through our bedroom with the systematic precision of someone following a list. Dresser drawers, not ransacked, just checked and closed. Nightstand, opened, something removed, closed. Then he went to the upper shelf of our closet, and he reached past the boxes Sarah had already handed down, and he picked up the lockbox I kept there. He didn't struggle with it, didn't shake it or examine it, or look for a way to force it. He just picked it up, confirmed its weight, and placed it carefully into the duffel bag like a man who already knew exactly what was inside it, and had already been told exactly how to get it open. That's the moment something shifted. Not the man in my bedroom. Not Sarah directing him. The lockbox. The way he handled it. She'd told him the combination. Or she'd given him the key. I reached into my pocket. Found my keys. Ran my thumb along the ring until I reached the small brass key that had lived there for 3 years. The one I used to open that box maybe once a month. The one I had never once removed and given to Sarah because there was no reason to. The key was gone. I didn't know when I'd last consciously registered it. Last week. 2 weeks ago. I used that box so infrequently that its absence on my keyring had simply never announced itself. My colleague Patricia appeared at my elbow. Liam, the Northgate call starts in 5 minutes. I looked up at her. Whatever was on my face made her stop mid-sentence. Cancel it, I said. I watched the man finish. He was thorough, unhurried, professional. 21 minutes from the time he arrived. Then Sarah walked him back to the front door, the duffel bag full and heavy now. She checked the hallway again. Same move, same left-right scan, same awareness of being observed from directions I wasn't positioned in. Then she opened the door. And she hugged him. Not the way you hug someone you're sleeping with. I want to be specific about that because it matters. This wasn't passion or relief or the residue of something romantic. It was the hug you give someone who just did you a significant favor, the kind of embrace that communicates gratitude and partnership and shared purpose. It lasted for seconds. Then he was gone, and Sarah closed the door and stood in my living room for a moment, completely alone, and her expression was something I had never seen on her face in 7 years. Satisfied. Calm. Done. My phone buzzed. Sarah. Bruno just knocked my entire water bowl off the counter. Absolute chaos. Miss you. She included a laughing emoji and a photo of Bruno looking innocent near a spreading puddle. I stared at that message for a long time. She was sending me dog updates. While the evidence of whatever she had just done walked out of our building in a duffel bag, and the damp on her shoes probably wasn't even dry yet, she was texting me with a laughing emoji. I typed back, haha, classic Bruno. Then I opened my banking app. Underscore Joint checking. Normal. Joint savings. Normal. Then I navigated to the individual account I maintained separately, the one I'd been building quietly for 3 years, since my father's health had started to decline. 8 months of emergency expenses. Money I'd set aside with the specific intention of having a floor underneath me if things got bad. I hadn't even told Sarah exactly how much was in it. I'd mentioned it existed, vaguely, the way you mention a safety net without pointing directly at it. Last transaction, Monday. Yesterday. 4:52 p.m. Wire transfer. Outgoing. $26,800. To an account I didn't recognize. I scrolled up through the transaction history with steady hands that didn't feel like mine. 6 weeks ago, $3,800. 5 weeks ago, $6,100. 3 weeks ago, $9,400. Each transfer small enough that if you weren't looking, you wouldn't look. Together, $46,100. She hadn't done this yesterday. She'd been doing this for 6 weeks. Before the cameras went offline. Before the man with the duffel bag. This wasn't a decision made in a moment of desperation or anger. This was a plan. It had a beginning I couldn't identify, a middle I'd lived through without noticing, and an end she had scheduled to happen tonight, at 8 p.m., when she'd assumed I'd finally walk through the door and find an emptier version of my own house, and the kind of absence that takes weeks to fully understand. She'd asked me this morning if I was working until 8. Not because she missed me, because she needed a window. I looked at the time, 10:41 a.m. She thought she had until 8 p.m. She was wrong. I left the office without telling anyone. Took the stairs. Sat in my car in the parking garage with the engine off and the camera footage still running on my phone, and I watched the whole sequence again from the beginning. Man arrives. Sarah lets him in. Bedroom, closet, lockbox, duffel bag, hugged, gone. For minutes 22 seconds to summarize everything. I called my bank. Fraud department. Waited 8 minutes on hold listening to instrumental music specifically calibrated to make terrible moments feel worse. The representative's name was Marcus. I explained the transfers calmly and precisely, the same way I talked through supply chain disruptions at work, the same way I'd learned to present problems that required immediate solutions without letting the size of the problem change the quality of the communication. Marcus pulled the account history. Went quiet. Mr. Hartwell, these transactions were authorized using your personal security credentials. Correct password. Correct PIN. Correct answers to all security questions. I understand that. They were initiated from a device registered to your home network. Sarah's laptop. She hadn't guessed my password. She'd watched me type it. 7 years of sitting beside me on the couch, across from me at the kitchen table, close enough to observe the small routine of a man who trusted the person he was next to. She'd never needed to hack anything. She'd just paid attention. Freeze everything, I said. Every account. Joint and individual. Right now. Sir, I can do that. But there may be a waiting period before. Now, please. Accounts frozen. I hung up and sat in the parking garage and thought about where to go. Not home. Not yet. The police had my address and were presumably moving. But I needed to understand what I was actually dealing with before I walked into any room where Sarah might be. I needed someone who was good at finding things people had deliberately hidden. I called my friend Donovan. Donovan Cruz had been my closest friend since our sophomore year at the University of Washington, when we'd been assigned to the same study group for an economics course and discovered we had the exact same approach to problem solving. Start with the data, don't speculate past it, and never assume the first answer is the final one. After college, I went into logistics. Donovan went into private investigation. He ran a firm out of South Seattle that specialized in corporate due diligence and asset recovery, the kind of work that lived in the careful, document-rich space between what people claimed to be true and what the records actually showed. He'd told me once, over beers after a Seahawks game, that the most common thing he found in his work wasn't dramatic deception or elaborate conspiracy. It was people who had never been asked the right questions. People who, if someone had simply looked at the right records at the right time, would have been found out immediately. I'd referred 2 business contacts to him over the years. I'd never imagined I'd show up at his door looking like I'd been walking and didn't know yet that the ground was gone. He opened the door, took one look at my face, and stepped aside. I showed him the footage. He watched it from beginning to end without moving, without expression, the particular practiced stillness of a man trained to observe without reacting. Then he rewound it twice, paused on the man's face near the front doorway, where the camera angle caught him at 3/4 profile for approximately 2 seconds before he turned away. I know this type, Donovan said. Not loudly, almost to himself. I waited. The way he moves. He pointed at the screen, checking sight lines before entering, handling objects along the edges, not the surfaces. Systematic room progression, he didn't browse. He executed a sequence. That's not a burglar. Burglars are chaotic. They grab visible valuables and leave. This man came for specific items in a specific order, and he didn't deviate. He turned to look at me. What was in the lockbox? I listed everything. My passport, my grandfather's ring, a gold band that had been in my family for 3 generations, the one thing my father had specifically asked me to keep safe when his health began declining. The deed to my car, a USB drive containing my father's estate documentation, approximately $400 cash. Donovan's expression shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly, when I mentioned the estate documentation. Your father passed, he said. It wasn't a question. He knew. I told him 8 months ago. His estate finalized 6 weeks ago. Donovan was already at his desk. Keyboard. A database I didn't recognize the interface of. Sarah's full name, he said. Date of birth. Hometown. Sarah Elizabeth Whitfield. February 14th, 1985. Originally from Boise, Idaho. 30 seconds of typing. Silence. He turned the screen toward me slowly. 0 results. Not limited results. Not records with gaps or inconsistencies. 0. As in, the system had searched every available database. DMV records, state ID registries, credit history, public records, and found no evidence that a woman named Sarah Elizabeth Whitfield, born February 14th, 1985, in Boise, Idaho, had ever existed. Run it again, I said. He ran it again. Try variations, I said. Sarah Whitfield. Maybe the birth date is slightly off. He tried variations. 8 of them. Each one came back empty. He cross-referenced her social security number from our joint tax returns, which I pulled up on my phone. The number existed. It resolved to a real person. A woman named Sarah Jean Alderman, born 1988, died 2005, 17 years old. Donovan leaned back in his chair. She's a ghost, he said simply. The weather report delivery again. It's called ghosting, not the dating term, the identity theft methodology. You find someone who died young enough that their identity predates comprehensive digital records. You apply for documents using their social security number, build credit over time, construct a history layer by layer. Clean paper trail. No living person to contradict you. It takes time, resources, and connections to execute properly. He paused. She wasn't new to this when she met you, Liam. This infrastructure takes years to build. 6 years, I said. Probably longer, he said. She built this before you. You may not have been the first. The room was very quiet. Marcus, he said, then corrected himself. Liam, I need to ask you something carefully. He leaned forward. The estate documents in that lockbox. What exactly did they contain? My father's estate had been modest but real. A house outside Tacoma that had been paid off for 15 years. A retirement account. A small investment portfolio he'd built slowly over 3 decades. The kind of patient, unglamorous wealth building that didn't make headlines, but added up to something meaningful. Total value, approximately $340,000. I was the sole heir. The estate had finalized 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks ago. The same week the transfers from my individual account had begun. She knew the exact amount, I said. It wasn't a question either. She had access to your home, your devices, your documents. She's been watching this develop for months, possibly longer. He stood up. There will be additional documents at your house. Estate paperwork, legal filings, perhaps a power of attorney she drafted and needed your father's executor information to complete. We need to know what she took and what she's planning to do with it. He looked at me directly. But you're not going in there alone. He called Detective Ewan before I could argue. Underscore. James Ewan was a detective with the Seattle Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. A compact, unhurried man in his mid-40s who Donovan had worked alongside on 3 separate cases over 5 years. The kind of professional relationship built not on friendship, but on mutual respect for how the other person operated. Donovan found things. Ewan built cases around them, and neither one wasted the other's time. Ewan picked up on the second ring. Donovan handed me the phone. I talked for 4.5 minutes. I described everything from the beginning. The cameras, the footage, the man, the lockbox, the bank transfers, the dead woman's social security number. In the same sequential, unemotional way, I describe a supply chain failure to a room full of executives. Each fact in order. No editorializing. No anger in my voice yet, though I could feel it sitting below everything like pressure behind a sealed door. Ewan didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he was silent for 4 seconds. Send me the clearest image you have of her face from the footage. Right now. I sent the best frame from the living room camera. Sarah in profile, near the front door, looking down the hallway. Her face partially turned toward the camera, lit by the morning light coming through the window she'd complained about for 3 years because it made the living room too bright in the early afternoon. 20 seconds passed. I'm looking at her right now, Ewan said. His voice had changed slightly, not dramatically, not in a way that would have registered to someone not paying attention, but I was paying very close attention. In our system. Another pause. Longer. We know her as Angela Marsh. I didn't say anything. Before that, she used the name Carolyn Pierce. Before that, 2 other names I'm still pulling. His chair creaked as he shifted. She's wanted in Washington, Nevada, and California. Estate fraud. Identity theft. Conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Impersonation for financial gain. A pause. She's been doing this for at least 12 years. 12 years. I'd been married to her for 7 of them. The man in your footage, Ewan continued, fits the description of a known associate. We've been trying to put him in the same room as her for 4 years. His name is probably not the one he uses, but we know him. Movement in the background. I could hear him standing, phone still at his ear, reaching for something. I'm dispatching units to your address right now, and I'm calling the airport. Does she have a vehicle registered separately from yours? Yes, I said. A gray Toyota Camry. I have the plate. I gave it. Brief silence. Mr. Hartwell. His voice went careful, precise. Her vehicle triggered an automated plate reader 9 minutes ago. Where? Seattle, Tacoma. South Terminal. I looked at Donovan. She had a flight, Ewan said. It wasn't uncertainty, it was confirmation. He was already moving. Stay where you are. Do not go to the airport. Do not contact her. We'll handle this. He hung up. Donovan and I sat in his office in South Seattle, and I drank coffee that tasted like cardboard, and we watched the clock, and I thought about Sarah standing at our front door that morning, mug in both hands, completely easy, completely warm, asking me what time I'd be home. The precise, surgical patience of a person who had already run this exact sequence multiple times and knew exactly what she was doing and exactly when the window closed. She'd calculated until 8 p.m. She'd planned to be in Mexico City before I walked through the door. My phone rang at 5:08 p.m. We have her, Ewan said. 3 words. The quietest 3 words I'd ever heard. Her real name was Angela Marsh. Born in Sacramento, California, 1981. 43 years old. What the investigative record eventually revealed was the portrait of someone who had made a comprehensive and long-running study of a very specific human vulnerability. Not greed, not recklessness, not stupidity. Trust. The ordinary, reasonable, completely rational trust that a person develops towards someone they love. The trust that says, I don't need to verify this because I already know this person. I've known them for years. They've sat at my table and slept in my bed, and I've seen who they are when they're tired and sick and afraid, and I know this person. She knew how that trust worked. She knew it made people stop looking. Angela Marsh had, prior to Seattle and Sarah Whitfield, operated under 4 documented identities across 3 states: California, Nevada, and Arizona. The pattern, once assembled, was precise and consistent. She selected targets who were not wealthy, exactly, but comfortably stable. Men in their late 30s to mid-40s. Men who had or were expecting to receive inheritances. Men who kept their financial lives somewhat private, not from their partners, but simply from habit. The kind of privacy that isn't hiding anything, just the ordinary compartmentalization of a person who manages their own affairs. Men who trusted. She would invest 1 to 3 years building the relationship, long enough to be past the stage of early scrutiny, long enough that the question of who she was before had stopped being asked, long enough that the target's financial picture had fully clarified and the optimal exit window could be identified. In one case, in Nevada, she'd waited 4 years. The target was a man named Robert, a civil engineer whose mother's estate had been tied up in probate for 3 years. Angela had simply waited for probate to conclude, then executed the exit within 11 days of the estate finalizing. By the time Robert understood what had happened, she'd been gone for 6 weeks and was already 18 months into a new identity in a new city with a new name and a new person sitting across from her at a restaurant wondering how lucky they were to have found someone like this. The man in my footage was a career criminal named Tomas Vega, who had worked with Angela across 2 of her previous operations and whose role was consistent. Take the physical items. The cash, the documents, the irreplaceable objects that cameras and wire transfers couldn't explain away. He was careful, practiced, and, as his arrest record eventually showed, had been doing this kind of work for longer than Angela had been targeting estates. They found him at a FedEx store in Linwood attempting to ship a package to a Phoenix address. Inside, my father's estate documents, my grandfather's ring, the USB drive, and a notarized power of attorney document bearing my signature. Except I had never signed it. The signature was perfect. Years of proximity, years of watching me sign things, years of small deliberate observation, and she'd practiced it until it was indistinguishable from mine to any clerk or notary who hadn't been specifically briefed to look for forgery. The document would have given Angela, or whoever she became next, legal authority over my father's estate. $340,000. The house in Tacoma. The investment account. Everything my father had spent 30 years building while working a job he didn't love so that his kid would have a floor beneath them when things got hard. She'd been planning to take all of it. And she'd been sitting across from me at breakfast for months while she planned it. Underscore. The trial was 4 months later. I sat in the witness stand and described everything I've just described to you. The cameras, the footage, the man, the lockbox, the bank transfers, the identity, the estate documents. In the same precise, sequential way I described it to you in. Each fact placed carefully. No performance. No visible collapse. Just the data, in order, delivered to the 12 people in the jury box who were trying to understand how a person does this. Angela sat at the defense table 12 feet away from me and watched me testify. I watched her back, and I finally understood the expression I'd been trying to name for months. The one she'd worn in the living room after the man with the duffel bag left. The one I'd seen occasionally across a dinner table when she didn't know I was looking. The one she'd had in the wedding photos that I'd gone back and examined after the arrest and finally identified in retrospect. It wasn't love. It wasn't affection. It wasn't even contempt. It was calculation. The permanent, ongoing, never fully resting calculation of a person who approached every human being in their orbit as a variable in an equation. Not cruel. Exactly. That implies emotion. Just clinical. She was looking at me on the witness stand the same way she'd always looked at me, assessing what use I might still be. Whether there was an angle I hadn't considered, a play available even now, a way that the man who'd put her in this room might still serve a purpose she hadn't fully explored. There wasn't. Angela Marsh received 16 years. Tomas Vega received 11. I recovered $43,800 of the transferred funds. My father's estate documents were returned intact. The power of attorney was ruled fraudulent. The lockbox contents were returned to me in an evidence bag 7 weeks after the arrest. My grandfather's ring was wrapped in a clean white cloth, placed in the corner of the bag like something someone had handled with care, which made me angrier than almost anything else about the whole thing. I put the ring back in the lockbox. I put the lockbox back on the shelf. I changed the combination. Underscore. Here is what I've thought about most in the time since. Not the betrayal itself, though the betrayal was enormous and real, and I won't pretend it resolved neatly or quickly. Not the money, which was recoverable and ultimately recovered. Not even the specific acts of deception, the fake identity, and the forged signature, and the years of performance. Those things are facts. They happened. They're done. What I keep returning to is the question she asked me that Tuesday morning. Are you working until 8 tonight? I've turned that question over more times than I can count. Because here's what it was. It was a question designed to sound like the kind of question someone asks when they love you. The kind of question that means, I'm thinking about your day. I'm thinking about when you'll be home. I'm present in your life and interested in its shape. It was calibrated, and I mean that precisely, calibrated, to land on me as warmth and land on her as information. She asked it easily, completely naturally. 7 years of practice, and she'd gotten so good at it that the ease was indistinguishable from genuine feeling. I've spoken to 2 therapists and a detective since the trial, and all 3 of them, from different professional angles, arrived at the same description of what she was doing. She had learned, with remarkable precision, how to mimic the texture of love without ever actually experiencing it toward me. Not to deceive in the way we normally think of deception, not through lies exactly, but through accurate, sustained performance of what a person who loved someone would do. She was good at it because she'd been doing it for 12 years. And I was vulnerable to it. We're all vulnerable to it, because none of us believe, when we're in it, that the warmth we feel from another person might be manufactured. We don't believe it because we don't want to believe it, and more importantly, because there's no practical way to go through life treating every expression of care as potentially fraudulent. You'd break every connection you had. You'd hollow out your own life, trying to verify the authenticity of something that can't be verified from the outside. That's what she was counting on. And here's the thing I want you to understand, because it's the part that took me the longest to fully accept. She wasn't wrong. Not about the plan. The plan was wrong and criminal, and I hope she spends every one of those 16 years thinking about it. But she wasn't wrong that love makes you stop looking. That's not a weakness. That's what love is. It's the decision to stop auditing the other person. It's the extension of trust without the demand for constant proof. It's the thing that makes a shared life possible at all. She weaponized something real. And the only reason she didn't succeed is because a repairman finally showed up on a Monday and fixed the cameras. Not because I was suspicious. Not because I'd sensed something wrong. Not because of any instinct or investigation or careful attention I'd been paying. A repairman. A landlord who finally responded. 11 days of faulty wiring followed by 2 hours of work and a text message that said, all fixed. 30 seconds of curiosity on a Tuesday morning. That's the margin. Underscore. I'm going to tell you something now that I haven't told many people. About 6 weeks after the arrest, When the immediate chaos of lawyers and statements and frozen accounts and returned evidence bags had slowed enough for me to sit still without something demanding my attention, I drove to the house I'd grown up in. Not the house my father died in. He'd been in assisted living for his last 2 years, but the house I'd grown up in Tacoma, the one we'd sold when I was 24 to help cover his care costs. Different family lived there now. I didn't knock. I just parked across the street and looked at it for a while. My father had been a simple, honest, hard-working man who did not understand deception. Not because he was naive. He was a practical person with clear eyes about how the world worked, but because he'd made a conscious choice, very early in his life, to operate without it. He'd told me once, when I was maybe 14 and had lied about something small and been caught, and was trying to construct a more convincing version of the lie. Liam, the energy you're spending right now to make the lie work? That's exactly how much easier honesty would have been to begin with. I sat across the street from his house, and I thought about the woman who had planned to take everything he'd built, and I thought about him, and I thought. The thing that would have made him angriest wasn't the money. It would have been the waste. The extraordinary waste of a genuinely sharp, genuinely capable human being who could have built something real with all of that intelligence and patience and precision, and instead chose to spend 12 years of her life performing a fraudulent version of love for men she didn't know, in cities she'd eventually flee, under names that didn't belong to her. She was smart enough to build something real. She built something hollow instead. I drove home. Bruno was waiting at the door, clearly aggrieved by the length of my absence, tail moving in wide, indignant arcs. I sat on the floor of the hallway with him for a while and let him be dramatic about it. There are things I know now that I didn't know then. Not profound things. Practical things. The kind of things that feel almost embarrassingly simple in retrospect, but that I'm going to say anyway, because someone reading this or watching this might find them useful. The first one is this. The size of a secret is not proportional to how hidden it looks. Angela had maintained a false identity for 12 years. Across multiple states. Multiple relationships. She had a social security number belonging to a dead teenager, a constructed credit history, documentation that had passed real scrutiny in real legal proceedings. And all of it, resolved to 0 results the moment Donovan typed her name into a proper database and pressed search. The secret was enormous, and it was invisible, and it was also, once someone looked directly at it with the right tool, completely not there. The hiding had never been in the quality of the documentation. It had been in the fact that no one ever looked. No one looked because she made sure they didn't want to. The second thing is related to the first. People who are performing a version of themselves work very hard to make sure the questions you need to ask don't feel necessary. This is different from hiding. This is active management of your curiosity. Angela never refused to talk about her past. She talked about it all the time, stories about Boise, about her family, about college, about jobs she'd had and places she'd lived. The stories were detailed and consistent and warm and the kind of thing that makes you feel like you know someone. They were also, as far as UN's team was able to determine, entirely fabricated. But their function wasn't to lie to me. Their function was to satisfy the part of me that was curious so that the curiosity would stop. And it worked. I stopped being curious because I felt like I already knew. The third thing is about money, which is less romantic, but more important. Know your own accounts. This sounds obvious. It should be obvious. But I kept a savings account that I checked maybe once a quarter. I had banking credentials that I used at a desk in our home where I could be observed. I had a lockbox key on a keyring that I touched every day without registering its presence. The infrastructure of my own financial life was familiar enough to me that I'd stopped actively knowing it. And that gap, that space between what I had and what I was actually paying attention to, was where she built a 6-week runway to run. Check your accounts. Change your passwords. Not because you distrust the person you're with, but because your own financial clarity is something you owe yourself regardless of who's in your life. The fourth thing is the one that matters most and that I struggle most to articulate clearly. Donovan said something to me, a few months after the trial, over the same kind of beer and football combination that had produced our previous uncomfortable conversation about deception. He said, "The thing that gets me about this case is that you did everything right. You trusted the person you were with. You weren't paranoid. You weren't running surveillance on your wife. You had cameras in your house for the perfectly normal reason that people have cameras in their houses. You happened to look at them at the right moment for the completely ordinary reason that the repairman had just fixed them. And because of that sequence of completely unremarkable events, you caught something that 6 other men in 4 states didn't catch until it was over. He paused. What I keep thinking about is the guys who didn't catch it, who came home to empty houses and cleaned out accounts, and a woman they'd never actually known who was already 18 months into being someone else entirely, who spent years trying to understand what had happened to them. Some of them probably still don't fully know. I thought about that for a long time. The margin between caught and not caught wasn't suspicion. It wasn't vigilance. It wasn't some superior instinct on my part. It was an 11-day electrical fault and a landlord who finally sent a repair technician and a Tuesday morning with 2 minutes of dead time between meetings. That's the honest answer. I got lucky. But here's what I did with the luck. When the footage loaded and I saw what I saw, I didn't hesitate. I didn't explain it away. I didn't construct a narrative that made it less than what it was. I didn't look at my wife directing a stranger through my bedroom and tell myself there had to be a reasonable explanation I wasn't seeing. I looked at what was actually there, and I responded to what was actually there, not to what I wished was there. That, I think, is the one thing I actually did right. When reality finally became visible, I looked at it. Underscore. A few things happened in the year after the trial that I want to tell you about, because they're part of the story too, not just the dramatic part. My mother, who had liked Sarah, liked her genuinely, in the uncomplicated way my mother liked people who were kind to her son, went through a period of real grief after the arrest. Not just on my behalf. She had lost someone she'd thought she knew, someone she'd hugged at holidays and asked for interior design advice, and talked to about her garden. The woman she'd lost had never existed, but the loss itself was real. It took her a long time to reconcile those two things, and I don't think she ever fully did. My colleague Patricia, who had been standing next to me when I told her to cancel the meeting and watched me with an expression on my face she couldn't place, sent me a handwritten note 4 months after the trial. It said, "I don't know exactly what happened, and I don't need to. I hope you're okay." She'd left it on my desk while I was in a meeting. I've kept it. Donovan, who had been professionally detached through the entire investigation, the clean instrument of fact-finding that the situation required, called me on a Sunday evening about 2 months after the verdict and asked if I wanted to grab food. We didn't talk about the case at all. We talked about everything else. It was the most thoughtful thing anyone did for me in the entire year. Bruno, for his part, had apparently exhibited 0 indicators of anything wrong throughout Sarah's presence in his life and the entire investigation. He had liked her. He'd pressed his head against her knee while she read on the couch. He'd brought her his ball with exactly the same enthusiasm he brought it to me. Either dogs are less perceptive than their reputation suggests, or she was also good at fooling them. I've chosen to believe the first explanation because it preserves my feelings about my dog. I still live in Seattle. Different neighborhood. The Fremont area, closer to the water. I've kept the security cameras and I check them approximately never, which is the correct frequency for someone with nothing happening in their house, and a dog who spends most of the day asleep on a couch that is technically not his, but that we've both stopped pretending he doesn't use. I haven't been in a relationship since. Not out of fear, or at least not entirely. Partly because the ordinary work of rebuilding who you are after something like this takes longer than you expect, and partly because, and I want to be honest about this, I don't yet fully trust my own perception in that context. I trusted it completely before, and it was not warranted. I'll need time to recalibrate what trust in my own judgment looks like when the stakes are that high. That's honest. I think honest is what's owed here. Underscore. Here's the last thing. Angela Marsh. Christine Adler in the original story that inspired this one, but Angela Marsh in mine, in the version of this that I lived, had 6 confirmed victims before me across 12 years of operation. 6 men who came home to disrupted accounts and missing documents and a woman who was already gone. Some of them recovered financially. Some of them didn't. 2 of them, according to the investigative record Ewan shared with me after the trial, never fully understood what had actually happened. They knew they'd been defrauded. They knew the woman had not been who she said she was. But the complete picture, the scope of it, the duration of it, the deliberateness of the planning, had never been assembled for them the way it was assembled for me, because the evidence chain in their cases had never been as complete. I think about those men sometimes. Not with superiority. The only thing that separated my outcome from theirs was a repairman and a Tuesday. But with something that I think is the closest thing to purpose I've found in this whole experience. I understand something that most people fortunately never need to understand, which is what it looks like when someone who is very good at performing love is performing love. The texture of it, the specific ways it's indistinguishable from the real thing until, suddenly, you have the angle that reveals the difference. I don't have a clean lesson to offer you. I'm suspicious of clean lessons. Life rarely produces them, and the ones that get handed to us too neatly are usually someone else's experience reshaped to fit a moral we find comforting. What I have instead is this. Look at what's actually in front of you. Not what you want to be in front of you. Not what you've decided must be in front of you, because the alternative is unbearable. What's actually there? That's it. That's everything I've got. 30 seconds of curiosity on a Tuesday morning. 2 minutes of dead time. A feed that finally loaded. I looked at what was actually there, and everything that followed came from that. Underscore Angela Marsh will be eligible for parole in 9 years. Tomas Vega in 6. Whether either of them will choose to operate differently when they're out is a question I genuinely don't know the answer to, and I've made a deliberate decision not to spend energy on it. What they do with their freedom is not my variable to manage. What I do with mine is, I still have the lockbox, still have my grandfather's ring in it, still have the brass key on my keyring, a new key cut from a new lock because the old one was never returned. Every few weeks I run a thumb along my keyring to confirm it's there, not from paranoia, but from the same instinct that makes you check your wallet before you leave the house. The basic, sensible habit of a person who knows what they have and chooses to keep track of it. It takes about 2 seconds. It costs nothing. My name is Liam Hartwell. I'm 38 years old. I live in Seattle with a dog who has colonized my couch and an intact lockbox and a rebuilt savings account and a security app on my phone that I check approximately never. And on a Tuesday morning in March, because a repairman finally showed up and I happened to have 2 minutes between meetings, I opened a camera feed and looked at what was actually there. I hope you never need to do the same. But if you do, look. Just look. Don't explain it away. Look at what's actually there.